This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
Explaining football to the friend who's just there for the nachos? Hard. Tailgating from home like a pro with snacks and drinks everyone will love? An easy win. And with Instacart helping deliver the snack time MVPs to your door, you're ready for the game in as fast as 30 minutes. So you never miss a play or lose your seat on the couch or have to go head-to-head for the last chicken wing. Shop game day faves on Instacart and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 grocery orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Other fees and terms apply.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
It took a lifetime to find the person you want to marry. Finding the perfect engagement ring is a lot easier. At BlueNile.com, you can find or design the ring you've always dreamed of with help from Blue Nile's jewelry experts who are on hand 24/7 to answer questions. And the ease and convenience of shopping online. For a limited time, get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com. That's $50 off with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hi everybody, my name's John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and critic. Today I'm going to be talking to Paul Duncan. He is an author who's written many books, most notably his books for Taschen, the wonderful archive series, including 2 big books on the original trilogy of Star Wars and the prequel trilogy. He's also been involved with the Ingmar Bergman archives and the James Bond 007 archives, a new edition of which is due out just as soon as the new James Bond comes out, No Time to Die. We talk about all of that and more. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at @JohnTDRJONTY. Like, subscribe, and generally spread the word. We are depending upon you. I am depending upon you to publicize the podcast as far and wide as possible. But before you do any of that, please enjoy the conversation.
When I was a kid, we didn't have things like VHS or DVD or online or anything like that. So I used to watch movies, the movies I was allowed to watch. And when at night, I used to memorize the films that I'd watched that I'd liked. And I used to, as I was going to sleep, I used to name all the films that I'd watched. So I remember even a film that I hadn't seen in probably 40 years or so. There was a war movie that I really loved at the time, and so I always included that the name of that movie. I think it was probably a Robert Aldrich movie, not Dirty Dozen, but before that.
Attack, maybe?
No. It's the thing is that often there was no reference. There was no book, or there wasn't a place I could go to. There wasn't like I couldn't go to the library and look up the names of these films or anything like that. And I'm watching UFO and Thunderbirds and The Champions, The Persuaders, and these sort of shows, sort of 10, 12-year-old. And that was really the thing right at the beginning. I didn't know, right, or understand, but I just knew that I loved these movies. I loved The Incredible Shrinking Man, which is still one of my favorite movies to this day. Them, Forbidden Planet, a lot of science fiction. I watched King Kong from behind the sofa I was so frightened. I remembered one day, it was a Saturday night. We used to have a bath on Saturday night. I would have a bath. And as I was being dried, I'd watch Star Trek. But also in that period, they started to show science fiction movies around that time, sort of early evening. And I remember one time watching the beginning of The Day of the Triffids and being so scared I couldn't watch the rest of the movie. That's just the intro. It was just a lighthouse and storms and stuff like that. I just decided it was too much for me. So my childhood, if you like, is always formed by these things that really interested me, I really loved, that really grabbed me. I had a very visceral connection to these movies.
Those early science fiction films that you're talking about as well, them and Forbidden Planet, and I really enjoy them. They really stand up today. I mean, I know they have the Beast from, what's it called? The Beast from 20,000.
These films, they still stand up. They're very simplistic, they're very simple, but they're very direct. So that the people who are writing and directing, Incredible Shrinking Man is based on Richard Matheson, who's a fantastic writer. So there's no messing about, there's no cod psychology. It's just like, bang, you're in, you're interested, and it really grabs you. And there was a certain point where I wanted to find out more about these movies, and where could you go? I couldn't find any books. I would go to the library, and there'd be the occasional book or picture books more often than not. I'm talking early 70s. I'm talking pre Star Wars here.
Right.
And then when Star Wars came out, I remember I was on holiday near Pershore. It was a camping holiday where there was no sun, just rain. And the typical holiday. My brother and I, we were virtually alone on this campsite with our parents. My memory is we were the only kids, and we basically played ping pong in a hall, for like 2 weeks. But occasionally we were allowed out, and we went out to Pershore one day, and in a shop I saw a copy of Starlog, and in Starlog they had Star Wars on the front cover. It was the period when in Britain where it was like the phony war, where you knew Star Wars existed, right, but Star Wars had not yet arrived in the country,
right,
because it had come out in May 77, but it didn't arrive in London until the end of the year, until December, and it never got to my part of the world in the Midlands until January 78. And it was that exact moment where I found out that I saw Star Wars on the cover and used my pocket money to buy a Starlog, which had been obviously imported into the UK. Very, very rare to see them in the wild, and and I grabbed a copy and basically read it and reread it. And this was a period where I was so in love with not just films but comics and TV series that I started making my own magazine. My dad had brought home paper, and I ruled out pages on this with lines to write on. It was completely blank paper, and I used to write and draw my own magazine, taking bits and pieces from things that I'd seen and just writing and drawing them on this paper in a limited edition of one, which only I got to see. So this is how this interest was there, this desire to know what was going on, how it was made, who are these people, what did it all mean? These are all questions of a teenager who didn't know anything about the world and needed to go out and discover it, and didn't know what tools you needed or how you did it.
How old were you when you finally got to see the film?
Well, I was there on the very first day in the Nuneaton when Star Wars was released, which was a Sunday, and I was sort of kid. The Nuneaton wasn't far away, in real terms, but it was far away for a kid.
Right.
So I was, it was 77, so I was 13. So early 78, so I was still 13. And so I arranged, I had seen the footage that had been shown on the BBC News of Star Wars being this enormous success. The blockbuster, the term blockbuster was now being used. I just envisaged on that Sunday in January, cold, freezing, so bitterly cold that the rain was, about to turn to sleep. It was that sort of cold. I envisaged hundreds of thousands of people lining up at this small provincial cinema on a Sunday afternoon for the first showing of Star Wars. So I arrived hours early.
Right.
And of course there was nobody there. My dad had dropped me off, literally dropped me off.
Yeah.
And I was standing there for hours. So sort of waiting for this film. And then even when the doors opened, it was like it was me and somebody else,
Right.
who had arrived just before the doors opened. And I sort of warmed up in the cinema, and then bang, the Star Wars logo comes on, John Williams music starts, and I was away. But it was, and it was well worth the wait, I should say. But yeah, that's how naive I was. That, looking back now, I thought it was lovely. And that was the first time I ever went to a movie on my own.
Oh, right.
So it wasn't the movie, there's always the movies that the parents pick for you or they bring you to, or etc. So that was the very first movie that I ever chose for myself. So really that was really the beginning of really wanting to find out more. And then after that, there was just an avalanche of information in magazines. So like Starlog, Starburst. I would, when I went on holiday, I would find Fantastic Films, which is another American magazine. It was just an explosion of information, mainly about the special effects, that were being developed. And then you got Starburst in the UK as well, came out. So yeah, and I was away. And then whenever there was a film, like there was a magazine about Star Wars that came out, and I got that. There was Alien was coming out, and there was a making of magazine, a little book that came out with Ron Cobb and Mobius designs in them. So this was a period when making of books and magazines started to appear before the movies came out. Unheard of now, but that was what happened then, that they were used as a way to entice people into this new world. And people had worked out that people wanted to know how the movies were made, what the development process is. So that was really... So I started picking up, I saved up all my pocket money. I did paper rounds to get more money. I even sold off my comics. I even had a library of comics that I sold off, all rented at school.
You were the Netflix of the comic world.
Absolutely. I remember I made 87, it was halfpence to read a comic and a penny to buy it. And I made 87.5 pence on one day. I'm telling you, that was a fortune, absolute fortune. And it was funny because I'm sure if somebody had a photograph, it would have been a brilliant photograph, because there were steps up and down to the school was on a slope. Mm-hmm. So there were steps up to the playground, so the school was below and there were steps up. And there were all these kids on the steps reading my comics that I brought in my bag, reading and renting, so that would have been a great picture. I still remember it now. Anything I could do in order to make money, in order to buy these books and things that I was really wanted to read and to know more. Yeah. So it was always that thing of wanting to know more and wanting to know what's the truth. Later on, when I'd done my own magazine all about comics and stuff. Later on, on my very first, my second job that I had in Northampton, I wanted to find out, I had a little bit of spare cash now, and I went into a local bookshop, and there were two books that I found that I really adored. I don't mean to jump ahead, but the book I would recommend, for people is Money into Light. That was the book I found one of my first paychecks, and it was this that I discovered what filmmaking was all about. This is Money into Light by John Boorman, making of Emerald Forest. What astounded me and really caught my imagination was the idea of the financial aspect of it, if you like, the fact that everything's cost money, and how you have the logistics, how you have to handle the money, then the location scouting. It went through every different aspect of the filmmaking process. And although, you pick up one or two of these pieces, when you read other books, this really had, his storytelling is tremendous in his movies, and I loved, Excalibur and Point Blank etc. But Point Blank was one of the movies that, I had memorized in my head as a kid. The whole process just came alive for me. I felt I was there with John Boorman, living his day-to-day experiences of making that movie, and I thought that was great. The thing is that at the very same time, I had bought a book on The Wild Bunch, and The Wild Bunch was a movie that I'd seen on television, on a tiny black and white television in my room, very, very late at night. It'd been on television, tiny, tiny black and white television, with the sound down so that I didn't wake my parents and my brother, who was in the same room. But I remembered every single moment of that movie to such an extent that when it was repeated, I said, well, there are things missing from this movie, which I turned out later to be true, that they'd shown an unedited version on television. So I bought this book all about the Wild Bunch, Sam Peckinpah's Wild Bunch, and it went into enormous detail about the plot and everything, which I had no other reference for, and it confirmed that I'd remembered it correctly, which was great. But also it was done with a very academic language and analysis, and it got very Freudian, and I think this is pre-Lacan. It just completely turned me off. Just those two books, if you like. This is only something that I can say now, looking back, but I realized my path was the John Boorman path. In terms of film books, it wasn't the other path of analysis and the structuring, etc. My path was the practical making of, the intent of, the director. Those were the sort of books I was interested in. And so it sort of became very clear that as my life and as my interest in films developed, that really those were the sort of books that held my interest, where, if you like, the making of the movie is as dramatic as the film itself. So that book set me on a path. Those two books divided my way of seeing things, of what I was interested in.
That's really interesting. It's really interesting that you have like a book that inspires you and another book which sort of says, not this, don't go in this direction.
Yeah, I mean, we all do it. We all have to try things. We all have to experiment and explore, and it just, yes, and that book, just those two books, set me on the path, the light side and the dark side.
I went to see Star Wars at the cinema. I was a little bit younger than you, but we did queue. We had a massive queue outside. I mean, maybe it's because it was an evening viewing, and I remember we got into the cinema, me and my dad, and we'd missed the crawl, we'd missed the opening shot, and we got in when all the rebels are sort of waiting for Darth Vader to burst in, basically. And sort of, that's when we'd taken our seats. That's when I could sort of concentrate on what was happening on the screen. So I'd sort of missed that iconic opening. And the weird thing is, I didn't get to see the full film again until like 1982, which was, I was twice as old as I was when I saw it, the first time. So it's this huge stretch of time between viewings as well, in which those magazines and those novelizations and all those things, live, basically.
Yeah, I think that when you're a kid, each of those movies has a very distinctive impression on you. And you can make a sort of list of movies that made an impression on you from when you're a kid. But there's a certain point where you see just so many movies. How can you distinguish one from the other? I'm always amazed by people who can pick out movies and particular scenes and the like that they've, that are part of their life that aren't from that early period, if you like. Because for me now, I'm watching a movie a day times 45, 50 years. From when I started watching movies, that's a lot of movies. So a movie to impress you now, to interest you now, really has to be pretty darn good in order to live up to the memories of the past.
Yeah, I have detailed memories of films which are probably not that great, but I just watched in a time when they made up a much larger fraction of my total film watching.
Yeah, that's another thing as well, that watching films at a different age, there are certain ages where, it's the same with books, etc. There's a certain time of your life when it's the right time to watch a movie, to watch a particular movie, whereas sometimes you're too young, sometimes you're too old for it. I don't think that's something that people think about or talk about much, but I think it is important that a specific movie talks to you or can be revisited and seen in a different way over and over again. I mean, a movie that I can go back to time and again is something like Terrence Malick's Tree of Life, which I adore, which I think is great. I remember being completely dumbfounded by it the first time I saw it. And I know the people who were with me watching it absolutely hated it, and they thought it was a waste of time. But, I felt there was something there, something for me. And I've seen it a couple of times later, subsequently. And each time it's grown. It's something that I think is no obvious message, but has something about it which connects to me very, very deeply. So I think that if I had seen that as a teenager or as a kid, I wouldn't have had the same connection to it, and perhaps would never have revisited it. And I think it's important to know that there are movies like that it's important to see them at a particular time.
Have you seen the longer cut of that he made?
No, I haven't seen yet. I know Criterion have done it, haven't they? They've put it. I haven't picked that up yet. I'm waiting. I've got, as I talk, behind me there is a wall with over 2,000 movies on them, and that I have not seen. And that's not. And then in the loft is X thousand movies that I have seen. So life is a bit like that. So last night I saw Day of the Outlaw by André de Toth. And the night before, I saw Fixed Bayonets by Sam Tholler and Curlin by Dennis Cote. And then I saw or resaw Kiyoshi's Kurosawa's Pulse the night before. So
that's such a good movie. That's so good.
Yeah, and still stands up. I was afraid because I remember when I saw it, there's certain movies that's a great movie for late at night when, if you like, your body and your mind have separated. Your body is at rest and your mind is a bit dull. And watching that movie very late at night is the ideal time for it, where it just eases over you and just suffuses your mind, and takes it over, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, I think. Which is another one that I saw recently. But no, seeing it again, it really held up really well. I saw it 15 years ago, but seeing it again, I was very surprised at how well it held up. And that's the thing, that some movies that you love or remember as a kid or when you were in development or in the past, sometimes it's there is a bit of a fear of rewatching them again to see whether they really did hold up and have the same amount of power as they did earlier.
When do you start actually writing then? So when you bought these books and you'd had this love of comics and films from your childhood to your teenage years, when did you sort of start thinking of it as in terms of a career or publishing stuff?
When I was 15, I was still at school, and a friend of mine was a fan of Doctor Who, and he brought in some fan magazines, and I had already been making my little one limited edition of one of my own sort of magazine. And a friend of mine says, well, why don't we do our own magazine? So we started. His aunt was the school secretary, so she had a typewriter, and so basically we decided to make our own magazine. I wrote the whole thing except one article on Doctor Who, which my friend wrote. I did all the drawings and everything because I love drawing and comics. And I just started writing. Instead of copying other articles, I started to write my own. So I was 15. And it was great because the school allowed us to use their Gazette Gestetner machine, and I managed to get out of playing cricket
Right.
in order to use the school printer. So I hated cricket. So that was like a win-win situation right there.
And that machine's like a precursor of a photocopy. It's like a barrel that you have to sort of...
If you look on the old typewriters, they have stencil, and what that is that when you press down, the ribbon doesn't come up to meet it, so there's no ribbon, and you have a wax stencil, and so when the type comes down, it cuts a hole in the wax, and then this long wax thing, which is A4 size or a little bit bigger, you wrap that round an oil drum. You make sure it's nice and flat, otherwise you get wrinkles and stuff. And obviously the drum has to be filled with ink, and then you rotate it by hand, this drum, and you rotate it one way and the drum goes around the other, and you basically you feed paper into it, and then the ink comes through the pad, through the holes that you've made, which is the type, onto the paper. It's very, very simple. Yeah, and then you have to feed in, wait for the paper to dry, the ink to dry, and then flip it over and put it in and make sure they're the right way up. Do it. So for each page you have to do that. That was the first one I did in 1980. It was April 1980. And basically that magazine, even though at the beginning it was all about film, television, and comics, so anything to do with fantasy, effectively, fantasy, science fiction, that developed over the years into just a comics magazine where I would interview comic writers and creators, and it lasted for 10 years till 1990, and was originally called Arkansas, and then became known, it was short, everybody called it Ark, so I shortened it to Ark. You know, I interviewed all the great comic artists and writers in the UK, people like Alan Moore and Brian Bolland and etc. And in America, I managed to get to America, and I interviewed people like Jack Kirby and Will Eisner and Mobius. Yeah, it was an amazing 10-year run, and and the magazine was distributed, ended up being perfect bound, litho printed, and distributed around the world. So yeah, so that was great. And then at the very end, because I was a student all the way through this, at the very end, basically all my money went into this. I had no life at all. And at the end, I had all this money that had always gone into printing, etc.
Right.
And I had enough for a deposit on a house at the end of it.
Wow.
When all the money came back. So it had a good ending.
Excellent. And then did you parlay that into sort of book deals and journalism?
Nothing. No.
Oh, okay.
I'd always had nothing. So I had always had from then I had a career as a technical author, and always in my spare time I would do these projects I was interested in. So I completely divided my time at work, and then to time after work would always be things I'd be interested in. So I was interested in crime mystery fiction, especially noir writers like Jim Thompson, Cornell Woolrich, James Ellroy, James Sallis, and this sort of thing. I started a magazine, co-founded a magazine called Crime Time in '95, and I edited the first few issues of that. And the magazine's still going now online by other hands. But through that, I got to interview more writers, and I got my first book out of that, which was a collection of interviews from that. But I never parlayed that into anything further. And then in '99, I started, because I'm so interested in movies, I started to do these little books I came up with the idea of Pocket Essentials, which are these small 96-page books that are like Cliff Notes or York Notes on movies. And of course it came from that idea of, when I was a kid, not being able to find out information quick and easy about who somebody was and what they'd done and what's interesting about them and how the films were made. So if you like, these notes were essentially that, giving not only a quick précis of the plot, but a little bit about the background, about how they were made, anecdotes, a bit about the meaning of it, if you like, the subtext of it, and also a little bit about the visual language that the filmmaker was using. So in this way, I did books on Hitchcock and Kubrick and Scorsese and Woody Allen and Orson Welles and things like this. In this way, it was great because I would watch the movies in chronological order and do like 4 a day and be making all these notes. And in that way, I could watch the whole run, the whole output of a filmmaker. And what was really, that was inspired by Channel 4, who used to do these seasons of Akira Kurosawa and Fritz Lang and film noir and others. And they would have like months where they would just show these movies, these seasons of movies. And I thought, oh, let's do something like that, but in the... And that was purely as a way to try and make money, if you like,
right,
for the first time. Because I was trying to do things myself. I was trying to research an author I loved and adored, for whom there had been no biography, Gerald Kirsch. And so I'd actually taken time off work. I had actually decided, no, I will stop working to concentrate on just doing this biography. But as it happened, it took longer than I thought, and I needed some money. So I came up with this idea of doing these books. And that really then triggered this whole move to Taschen, because I had done these books and I'd seen that Taschen had the very best distribution there was, as far as I could see. And I thought, oh, these pocket essentials are very nice and cheap. Let's try and sell these. Let's see if Taschen will take these to distribute them. Taschen said no. We don't distribute other people's books, thank you very much.
Right.
This is 99. But then about a year later, I'm on contract because I'm freelance technical author. I managed to get some work. I was on contract in Lytham St Anne's, working for the government. At my desk, I get a phone call, basically from Taschen, asking it would it be possible to meet up in Germany, in Cologne, and they'd pay my flight over there and et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, I'm on contract, so I can't go during the week. It'll have to be a weekend. So that's what happened over the weekend. I went over to Cologne, met Benedict Taschen, spent about 4 hours talking about movies and books. Yeah, and then he says, oh, let's work together. So that's when I started doing, if you like, movie books. It was a completely, in a way, accidental that I'm actually doing it as a career, because I never intended to do it at all. The only thing I'm interested in is something that I'm enthusiastic about. That's the only reason I did anything I did. Basically from 1980 to 2000, 20 years, is basically me just writing and about stuff that I love and enjoy and want to share with others. And in fact, the past 20 years, when I've been doing books for Taschen and others, it's been exactly the same. My attitude is always, oh, I found this thing, it's really cool. I want to tell somebody about this, and the fact that I don't know anybody, and the only way I can do it is to tell it through books.
A well-presented enthusiasm goes a long way.
Yeah, I mean, it's like so obviously I've done a lot of books since then. Mm-hmm. I mean, Taschen really gave me an entree into a whole different world, a whole different level. So previously, I would not have had access to archives or special materials, etc. But What I learned at Taschen is that I could get access to archives. And so for the first time, I'm getting closer to the filmmakers, if you like. I'd met, obviously, creators before, like authors and comic creators, and interviewed them. But I'd never really interviewed or got close to filmmakers. So really that was a new learning curve, but it's always the same. In fact, you tend to find that the filmmakers themselves are exactly the same, that they're really enthused about a particular subject and they want to express that through.
Explaining football to the friend who's just there for the nachos? Hard. Tailgating from home like a pro with snacks and drinks everyone will love? An easy win. And with Instacart helping deliver the snack time MVPs to your door, you're ready for the game in as fast as 30 minutes. So you never miss a play or lose your seat on the couch or have to go head-to-head for the last chicken wing. Shop Game Day Faves on Instacart and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 grocery orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Other fees and terms apply.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
their enthusiasm through their movies, and they're students of films and movies as well. So it's always interesting to meet like-minded people.
Who's been your sort of most impressive, sort of pinch me, I can't believe I'm actually sitting in the same room with so-and-so sort of moment?
Well, there's a lot of those. Picking out one would be unfair, I think, but I will. Really, I mean, I've been very, very lucky in that I've managed to meet and talk to, some very interesting and very influential people in the film world. I think the first one that I had direct contact with for any period of time was Michael Mann. I'd always loved his movies. I remember seeing Thief and being amazed by it, and also with my dad, I managed to get to see, I saw Last of the Mohicans and Heat, and we adored those movies, and watched them together. Going to that was a lovely time actually, going to the cinema. I had a connection with the local cinema. They would let me go to the early screenings, for press, even though I wasn't really press. And so I'd bring my dad along, and we'd go to there, and then afterwards he would treat me to a pizza, and we'd sit down talking about the movies. He wasn't really a cinema buff, whatever, but he did love the movies, And so Last of the Mohicans was like a cowboy movie. For him, it was a Western, but he loved it. And when we went to see Heat, I remember sitting down afterwards, he said, "Oh yeah, that's just like the old Cagney, Pat O'Brien movies."
Right, yeah.
And of course, he'd nailed it. Absolutely nailed it. And so when eventually I got to meet Michael Mann, I was doing a book on Michael Mann, and he very graciously allowed me to look through all his archives of materials that he had in his office while he was on pre-production for Collateral. So I had one of the rooms. So I got to look through all this amazing material. And Michael Mann has quite a fierce reputation, shall we say. He doesn't brook fools gladly. And I remember on the first day I was looking through all this material, I said, "This is strange. This is a strange image." I'd come across an image in the archives, and it was of a group of men. It had nothing to do with anything else, no film or anything that I could see. What we'd arranged is that at the end of each day that I was there, if I wanted to talk to Michael, because obviously he was busy on the movie, I could have 5 minutes to talk. And so at the end of each day, I would come and I would show him an image or ask him about a particular image. And he said, "Why did you pick this out, Paul?" He said, "There's something wrong. It's an anomaly, that you can't, it doesn't quite fit with everything else." So I wondered why you had this image. And then it turned out to be an image that he used as a reference. So on Last of the Mohicans, he used the Magritte Empire of Light. And, so I asked him, "Well, what's this Magritte doing in your in your archives here?" And he says, "Oh, that was my image to come back to on the movie." So whenever he and Dante Spinotti, the cinematographer, had any questions about how to approach a particular scene, how to light it, film it, shoot it, this was an image that they went back to, right, in order to help them discover how to solve the problem. In other words, by accident, I had found, if you like, a way in to Michael. So that was one aspect that I thought was fascinating. And also because I'd found that gave me, he trusted me more, that I was on the right track to do this book. And in fact, we did have issues on that book where the writer FX Feeney, the late FX Feeney, the great FX Feeney, who's like one of those very, very undervalued writers, I think. It was never really... When you've been around a while, you find out that there are some very, very talented people who don't necessarily parlay that talent into a career that earns them money. And you do find this a lot. I mean, you find it in a lot of things, but FX was great. Anyway, he supplied a manuscript, and, Michael wanted to read it to make sure it was okay. And Michael said, "No, don't agree with this. This isn't right. No. On particular points, through through the thing. And then we thought, oh no, how are we going to deal with this? And then we came up with the solution, which was the negotiation with Michael, which was this. Okay, Michael, you and FX sit down and you talk out the things that you disagree with, and we include it in the manuscript so that FX can have his say, but Michael can have his say as well. You know, if you like, a rebuttal within the manuscript. And that became a very interesting way of doing it, you know, because Michael got his say, but you could also, as a reader, you could understand the point of view. And it's very similar to, in fact, to me saying to Michael, hey, well, that's a James Cagney, Pat O'Brien movie, isn't it? And he was like, no, this is all based on detailed research on real people, you know, and he even showed me the photos of these guys from Chicago, you know, this crime gang, you know, and, you know, that he'd spent all these years researching and writing, because he's obviously a writer as well as a director. But I think there is a truth in both of them, in that he has molded the movie into a particular shape that's recognizable, because Pat O'Brien and James Cagney had based their characters on people that they knew, real gangsters, you know, from the period. So it all comes from research, and I think both approaches are valid, but those researches, etc., have to be manipulated and formed into a story in some way that's understandable and digestible for the audience.
Well, your experience of going into the archives and delving in and bringing stuff out, I mean, that's sort of replicated in the books themselves. I mean, they're now called the Star Wars Archive, the Stanley Kubrick Archive. I mean, when did that idea come up? Was that already in place at Taschen, or was that something that you were involved in creating?
Well, the very first archives was the Stanley Kubrick Archives, which was allocated to Alison Castle, I think, just before I arrived at Taschen. So I missed out on that. But as a result of the success of that book, Taschen asked me to do a book on Ingmar Bergman, on the Ingmar Bergman archives. Right. So really, the Kubrick book is basically separated by movie, and then you have a writer writing about each individual movie. What I wanted from the Bergman book is that Bergman was a great writer of scripts, a great director, but also he wrote the stories for radio, television, film, and theatre, as well as being a published novelist. So somewhat accomplished, I would say, as a writer.
Did he ever sleep, this man?
Well, not to my knowledge. Absolutely incredibly prolific. And I had no idea how prolific he was until I went to the archives, because I was unaware of he did 50 scripts for radio, you know, I mean, plays, you know, and as well as television stuff. So, and theatre adaptations. So it was actually, I should say that the funny way that came about is that I got Christina, one of the Taschen PRs, was actually friends with somebody who was a documentary filmmaker who knew Bergman, who had visited Bergman on his island in Fora. It's not Bergman's island, it's an island that Bergman lived on, I should say. And said, oh, Bergman is feeling underappreciated. And I thought, all right, that's good. So I mentioned this to Benedict Taschen, and he said, oh, yeah, we should do a big book on him. We should do an archives book on him. So what I did was I'd done all these monographs on directors, you know, on Hitchcock, Kubrick, Wilder, Fellini, Antonioni, etc., etc. And I basically put them all in a single box, these, you know, really nice photo books. And I sent them off with a letter to Bergman on the island. And I got, the story I got back is this. And I heard this later from Erland Josephson and other friends of his, that he ripped open the box and he picked out the book on Antonioni, the book on Kubrick, book on John Ford, etc., etc. And he says, where the fuck is the book on me? Right? and then he opens the letter, you know, with asking permission to do not only a book on him, but a much bigger book than all the other books that that were presented in front of him, and we duly got permission to do the book.
He says about time.
Yeah. I cannot confirm nor deny that this story is true, but this is what I heard, right? So print the legend, as John Ford would say. So this really had a project started. And that was, I think, that was a key project for me, because even though I'd done these other books were great, it's like Roman Polanski gave me access to his archive. It was just Antonioni gave me access to his archive. I went and met Antonioni, and while he was painting, and he at that time, because of his stroke, etc., he couldn't really speak very well. Even Italian he found difficult to speak, but gave permission, opened the archives. It was fantastic. And I remember I didn't speak Italian, couldn't really communicate with him, and he's there painting, and he picks up 2 pots of paint, right, to decide which color to put into like a particular space on his painting, because he did these slots. I don't know whether you've seen his paintings, but he did these sort of abstract, very evocative paintings. He picks up two colors, then he looks at me, and he raises one pot of paint and then the other pot of paint, as if, for me to decide what color he should put on the thing. And I said, I put my hands up and said, don't ask me, you're the artist, And, and he sort of gave a sort of wink and a smile, and then, picked one and carried on, so that was lovely. So I'd had all these other experiences, which was great. But this was like such a deep dive into Bergman. I cannot express to you just how wonderful it is to go into cold storage and be given free rein to racks upon racks of old mouldy paper that is now being preserved and cleaned up. I was doing this with Bengt Wanselius, who was Bergman's photographer for many years, and just a wonderful, wonderful guy. And he would go off. We split the work so that I handled all the text elements, and he went off and researched all the photography, because he knew everybody in Sweden. A top reportage photographer, as well as for film, TV, entertainment productions. He took portraits of royal family, all this sort of stuff. Fantastic, beautiful guy. So he went off all around over Sweden, unearthing stuff that had never been seen before, as well as having access to all of Bergman's materials. And then there was the Svenska film industry. They were at the time starting to pull stuff out of the original glass negatives. They were starting to pull out of storage in order to scan them. And basically we got them to scan all the Bergman material first, which is very helpful. I mean, everybody, the film people, the television, the National Television Archives and Studios, Dramaten, which is National Theatre, everybody opened up everything. It was amazing going to Stockholm and around Sweden doing this. I remember there was one day where they said at the Svenska film industry, they said, oh, we found a hidden room. And literally what had happened is this. In the side of a mountain, where they store all the stuff, there had been these filing cabinets. They'd taken the filing cabinets away in order to research and tidy up, and they found a door. And they opened the door, and beyond the door were all of Bergman's, for his own production company that he'd started, all his files. And it was like, oh, wow. So Bengt and I got in a car, raced up to these archives in order to start flipping through. And of course, Bengt is taking photographs of these flip books with Polaroids and script things and, continuity, etc., which we obviously included in the book. And even when we had the layout finished and approved, and Bengt did the final scans for the photography on that, even at that point, he said, you'll never believe this, Paul. I said, what? We took out, for the film Persona, which famously is in black and white, and also Bergman decided that since it's about cinematography and the idea of the image, the photographic image, then all the stills from it would only be frame enlargements from the movie. to such an extent that they included the sprocket holes on the side of the stills. And Banks says, Paul, and it was a black and white movie, Paul, you never believe this. I'm scanning away and I found down the back of a filing cabinet, when we took out all the, the old metal filing cabinets, you've got the drawers. Well, somehow, when you take the drawers out, down the bottom, there had been fallen some original large format color photography on Persona. Right. And I go, well, I exclaim somewhat, and on this, and Banks says, I'm scanning it now. I'm scanning it now. And the book was locked, right? And basically, we were looking through these images, and they were of Bergman and Liv Ullmann basically together on Fora while they were filming Persona. And basically, it's the start of their relationship, during the filming. So, I mean, it's important anyway. And so we then had to, we're then cutting full page images that were already in the book and approved in order to put in these images, a few of the images that we found. So this is it's sort of the thrill of the hunt that you find all this material. And also, sadly on that, there's another aspect in that you are dealing with people's lives. And this came very, very much on that book. It came home to me just how meaningful a person can be. Because even though I never met Bergman, and he didn't want to meet anybody, at this time of his life, he gave complete permission. And also he talked to people in Stockholm all the time, especially Erland Josephson, his closest friend. So when we were in Stockholm, we would visit all his circle of friends, and they would tell us stories about Bergman, about their relationship, about what Bergman was doing now, on his island, all the latest gossip and stuff like this. And in that way, they were keeping Bergman updated on the progress of the book, about what the latest thing is, etc., which was lovely. And I remember Erland saying to me, he says, Bergman is in his bungalow, in his house on Fora, and he's got all his old scripts and photos, all his copies, etc. And he's laid them out, as Erland is explaining to me. He had laid out all of these out all over the floor of his house, and then had sat on a high chair looking down on them as though he was surveying his life, as though psychologically Bergman was doing what I and Bengt and everybody else were physically doing with this book. And that was such a powerful and a moving image. It really brought home just how you're not just dealing with movies here. You're dealing with people's lives, and their feelings and what their lives mean to them. And so that was beautiful. And sadly, Bergman never got to see the book because he passed before the book was completed. But he knew everything about the book. That was to know about all the things that we'd found, etc. And even people turned. There was a reporter reporting on the book who said, "Oh, my father used to play with Bergman as a kid, and as a kid they made a film script, which was basically Bergman and his friends, who would have been 15, about the same age I was doing my magazine when I started. They didn't know how to do a film script, but they made a film script, and they did it by they would write on one page, they would write what was happening in the movie, and it was a silent movie, because that was what they were watching at the time. And then on the other page, they didn't know how to do a script, so they would take a photograph and put it there. So that was so each page was like that. And he says, "Oh, and I've still got the script. Bergman gave it to my father, so he has it." So we ended up, because Bergman had passed and a reporter was interviewing Bengt because of this, these other things started to appear, and we actually got copies of that to include in the book. So it's sort of, that was a really beautiful book and a beautiful experience. And this is the thing that came across in the making of the book, is that it is about the people involved and their feelings and how they relate and their fun and experience of making the movies.
We started talking about cliches at the beginning, but it's that cliche of cinema is life. Life is cinema. I mean, this is a very literal expression of that.
One of the things about cinema is that I think often the films connect to us because they connect to something in our lives. Sometimes we know about it. We know what the connection is. Oh, I'm interested in sports cars, so therefore I see a movie about sports cars because it's talking about the same thing I'm interested in. So there's that sort of aspect to it. But then there's another aspect of it, which I think is the reason, for example, I connected to Tree of Life from Malick, because there's a whole other group of movies that actually talk about the experience of living, and what life is about, as you're saying. Those are, if you like, the surprising movies. Those, I think, are the ones that will live with you the rest of your life. They will be like a sounding board for you to go back and to try and understand what your life is about. In fact, one of the fears that I had when embarking on doing the Star Wars archives is that I wouldn't be able to find a story or something that the book would be about. The situation was Taschen had a contract with Disney to do a certain number of books, including 2 books with Lucasfilm. I was asked to go to meet with Lucasfilm and to try and come up with a book. And I really didn't know what I was going to do, because in these situations, we've now reached the point in publishing where there are, in the late 70s, early 80s, there were only a handful of making of books about cinema, on books about filmmakers that you could say were authoritative. So obviously you've got Hitchcock Truffaut, you've got Picture, the first. It's often talked about being the first making of book. You could also look at Cocteau's filming of Beauty and the Beast, his Diary of a Poet, I think it's called. So there are only a few books that you could really see as touchstones for making of books. But now, since 1980 to now, it's like there are millions of them. It's really, you can't turn around without seeing another book or having the information all on the internet. To now ask a writer or an editor or whatever to come up with a book idea that will be interesting and engaging in some way, it's frightening. And that was really what I had on Star Wars. And I didn't think, even though I'd been a fan of Star Wars, I really thought that everything had been done. And I was sure, everybody else is going to think that as well. Why should they buy a book on another book on Star Wars when there are already thousands of publications? It's a whole industry. So really, that was my fear. And it was only when George Lucas gave access to his archives and agreed to be interviewed that I knew that I could turn the book into an oral history. Only when I got to the situation where I was talking to George that I knew I had a book. Because with George, it wasn't about the nuts and bolts of a thing. So I couldn't, pointless me asking, what did you do on December 10th, 1976? Because he wouldn't have a clue. I mean, I don't have a clue what I did on December 10th, 1976. So why should he? But his real interest was in the philosophy of Star Wars. And then once I realized that there was a philosophy behind Star Wars, that George was willing to talk about it, and we would talk for hours about it and how it related to the world that we live in, that's when I knew that we had a book. I knew then that I could include all the things that you have in a making of. I present it in the present tense. I wanted that feeling that I'd had when reading Money into Light, where I felt I was with John Borman while he was filming Emerald Forest. I wanted to feel I was with George Lucas while he was filming the Star Wars movie. And so that was really my focus. And I wanted to draw out of George this idea of philosophy, etc., and to include that so that we had not only a very focused story, but a focus that could go somewhere that other stories and other books hadn't gone before. And that was it. That was the key. So that meant that the book had a meaning outside of being a making of. And that for me was very gratifying, because obviously I'm in my late 50s now, so I'm, the things that I think about on a day-to-day basis are different than the things I was thinking about when I was 20. And so the books that I do, I want to reflect the things I'm concerned about. So obviously we're concerned about the future, and so is George. And George was great. Very understated sense of humor, very black sense of humor. There were parts of the interview that I just couldn't publish because even though when you say something within a conversation, there is a certain understanding that you have during the conversation. But when you put it into black and white on the page, it doesn't live anymore. It deadens the other impact.
What did he say that you couldn't publish?
No. They're just jokes.
Right, I see.
Yeah. You see, and I knew that the jokes would fall flat. So so that's why within the text we did joke, and so I did include those a few of those joking moments in there. He was great. It's such a lovely, lovely guy. And I've been really lucky. I ended up over the 2 books. I did a book on episodes 4, 5, and 6, and then a book on episodes 1, 2, and 3. So over the 2 books, I got to spend 5 days with him, 5 complete days, which was great.
I mean, we've come full circle. We started with you in Nuneaton waiting to, in the freezing cold with the sleet coming down, waiting to get into Star Wars. And now we've finished with you spending time with George Lucas, talking about the philosophy of Star Wars. That's amazing. And your recommended book is John Boorman's, what's it called?
Money into Light. Money into Light.
Money into Light.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you need to get hold of a copy of that, John.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's also his son, Charlie Boorman, was in that. He cast his son in it. And there were all sorts of questions about filmmaking and whether a decision, how far are you willing to go as a filmmaker in order to make this movie? I mean, there was to physically go, because it wasn't an easy, it was physically demanding and dangerous. At points making that movie. And this is always interesting about how far will the filmmakers go. I mean, I was surprised. I was talking to George. George, basically, his first few movies, he didn't make any money. He was doing them for free. Companies, corporations were making money out of the product he was making, but he wasn't. And then he hit it with American Graffiti. And the first thing, as soon as he got his first, even though George had been borrowing money from people in order to survive, with the first bit of chunk of money that he got, he put up $500,000, which is the equivalent of $2.5 million today, into a little company to start a company called Industrial Light and Magic, ILM, in June 1975. And this is before 20th Century Fox had given the green light on Star Wars. So he'd actually invested, it was an enormous gamble, because even though 20th Century Fox had put seed money to develop Star Wars, in order to keep it going, to investigate how to go forward. They didn't end up with the budget. All pre-production had to stop. People were not being paid, and then the money wasn't given. The budget wasn't given. The money didn't flow again until December 75. So, I mean, just to give you an idea of how risky this whole thing is. But George and other filmmakers really go out there. They really put their lives on the line. And I think that's really commendable. So for me, filmmaking is about these people and what motivates these people to tell these stories. Why do these filmmakers think their stories are so important to tell? That fascinates me, and that's why I make these books.
And that's such an amazing, wide and eclectic sort of bunch of people as well that we got an opportunity to discuss. Listen, Paul, thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really fascinating.
Yeah, and I didn't even mention James Bond.
Oh God, that's your next one, right?
No, I did. I've already done the James Bond archives, but I've got an updated before the pandemic. I'd written and finished a chapter on the new James Bond movie, No Time to Die. So I've been on set, talked to the director and all the crew, all the heads of departments about the making of the movie, and even got to talk to Daniel Craig as well about it. So it's really, that continues, So I've added an additional chapter which will come out. Obviously, it's embargoed. It's not like the olden days where you would have the novelization of Star Wars coming out 6 months before the movie. And the comic coming out before the movie comes out. This is, completely embargoed, obviously. And it is, from everything I've seen, it is well worth waiting for the movie. So,
brilliant.
Yeah, I think there's a possibility this could be one of the best.
Well, I tell you what, let's do another interview when you're no longer under embargo.
I'm always available. I'm always in my little room in the Midlands. Waiting for somebody to call.
Well, I will be that somebody. Thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate it.
No problem. It was a pleasure. Take care, John.
So that was my conversation with Paul. His recommended book is John Boorman's Money into Light, a diary which charts the production of the film The Emerald Forest. Thanks very much to Elliot Atkins for providing the music for the episode. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at Dr. Jonty. Please like and subscribe and do everything you can to spread the word as wide and far as possible. We're doing really well with the podcast. I'm really pleased with the way it's going, but anything anybody can do to publicize it is greatly, greatly appreciated. So thanks very much, and I'll talk to you next week. Take care.
Cue the fireplace and your favorite fall movie. There's nothing better than a cozy evening at home with a glass of First Leaf wine. First Leaf is a personalized wine club that delivers right to your door. Sounds magical, right? They get to know your favorite tasting notes, which varietals you enjoy, and whether you prefer sweet or dry wines. So in every shipment, you get bottles tailored to your unique palate. Go to tryfirstleaf.com/fall to get your first 6 wines for just $44.95 with free shipping.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.